Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Richard Arjun Kaul, and welcome to Nine. Today is August the 30th, 2015, and I'm talking to you from New York City in New York. The Bridgegate scandal, so-called, which involved the closing of 3 lanes to the busiest bridge in the world in September 2013. The people involved in that, Bridget Kelly and Bill Baroni, who were 2 associates working for Chris Christie, are scheduled for their criminal federal trial on November the 16th. Now, Mr. Christie, throughout his campaign, has maintained that he had no knowledge of the bridge lanes being closed, which, according to the polls, most people do not believe. The trial, which is scheduled in November, has been slated as being the trial of this century, and people are talking about how, in fact, evidence will come out that will, in fact, prove Mr. Christie did give the order. Not only did he not know, but he actually gave the order for the lanes to be closed. So, Miss Kelly and Mr. Baroni will be defending themselves in this trial, and they unfortunately stand the risk of going to jail for a long period of time if found guilty. And I'm sure that defences, or the defences that their attorneys put up, are going to be as vigorous and thorough as possible. And it's highly likely that Mr. Christie and what went on in that office will be dragged into the proceedings. So come November, I'm sure everyone, at least in New Jersey, will be watching, and I'm sure around the country. And it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of the legal proceedings are. The other local story that's been getting some attention here in New Jersey is the upcoming lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender parade. Now, it's really a sign of the times, I think, that the LGBT parades, organisations, groups have come to be such a such a part of mainstream society. If you think about it, only 30 years ago, being gay or 35 was considered illegal. You could go to jail for being gay. And here we are today in 2015, celebrating lesbians, gays, bisexuals and transgenders. And, you know, with all the media that's been going on about the transgender community with Caitlyn Jenner and Gina Rosero, there's been I would say, a complete reversal in societal attitudes towards people who express their sexuality in different ways. Now, personally, you know, I'm a man of great tolerance. I think that people should do whatever they want to do so long as they're happy. I just find it somewhat amusing to watch how society can go from making an act or being a certain way illegal to suddenly having it be the flavour du jour 30 years later. And so I suppose the lesson for us as humans is that we should always be careful about judgments and opinions that we pass and make about the societies that we live in, because we don't know if 30 years down the road the things we think today are illegal and terrible are in fact then going to be legal and completely accepted. So it's always about keeping an open mind, an open heart and an open spirit. And I think I'd like to congratulate all those people who are attending the parade. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. There'll be a lot of great music and a lot of great costumes. Now, there's been a couple of national stories I think that warrant further discussion. And one of them is the leak of data from a site called Ashley Madison. Now, Ashley Madison is a website it's a Canadian website that was set up so that married people, could have affairs. It was a site that indirectly promoted infidelity, and so it was men or women who were married. You know, a lot of them in relatively high-ranking executive positions, but wanted to have affairs and didn't want anybody else to know. Well, in today's world, as we all know, there's nothing that we can keep secret, you know, even including our thoughts from anybody else. They always get out one way or the other. And in this case, there was a data breach. A company called Impact Form hacked into the site and accessed all of the data on the people that belong to Ashley Madison. So there was a huge furore in the public press about all of these senior executives all over the world whose information has now essentially been disseminated all over the internet, and their cover has been blown. So, I think the moral of the story there really is it's an age-old moral. Be honest. If you want to have an affair, say so. Don't keep it secret. And I think this is a digital example of the cover being pulled off the act. And these people have decided to sue. They've filed a class action lawsuit here in the US, which I don't think is such a smart idea, because I think it's just going to lead to further exposure of who they are and what they did, and I don't think it's going to make their situation, if they're looking to improve it, any better. But it also raises the question of marriage and society, and the fact that so many people who are in marriages are looking to have liaisons outside of marriages. So really, the question I think that society should be asking itself is, do we really need marriage anymore? Or is it an outdated legal concept? And I think it's an important discussion, because there's been so much coverage in the press recently about gay marriage and about homosexuals wanting the right to be married, which I have absolutely no objection to and completely encourage, if that's what makes them happy. I find it, again, just amusing that heterosexuals who are married and are legally allowed to be married are now wanting to flee from the institution of marriage, and are doing it through some of these websites such as Ashley Madison, which, by the way, made a huge amount of money. So just to show you the number of people that are looking for weekend love affairs. The other local story that, again, has been getting a lot of coverage is the issue here in America, again, of the opiate prescription abuse. Now, this is, it's been classified by the CDC as the #1 health public policy, and they talked about it, across the board. It's not just limited to lower socioeconomic brackets, and in fact, the prescription opiate abuse is something that's more commonly associated with the middle and the upper socioeconomic classes. And the article actually that was written in one of the newspapers here was about the issue of the elderly people who are abusing opiate medications. So it seems now to have reached across all cultures, all races and all age groups. And I've talked about this issue before, about what needs to happen. I mean, ideally there needs to be, not to use a too out there term, a spiritual enlightenment, a re-enlightenment of society. American society needs to move away from its materialistic basis. It needs to re-examine its purpose. That said, and assuming that that's going to be a longer-term project, the more immediate solutions are to deal with the pharmaceutical companies that produce these medications, to limit, first of all, the extent of their advertising and marketing programs. Because if these companies do not push, and I say push, using that term, they literally push these medications on physicians, it will be less likely that physicians will then prescribe them to patients for conditions that really only require massage, therapy, and some non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications. So it is a problem, and people are dying because of it, because of overdoses, because of car accidents, and of course, politicians, this being political season, are making the most out of it. Some of them don't particularly care about it either way, but it's just great political fodder. But I think the path towards resolving this problem, I think, lies in dealing directly with the pharmaceutical companies and dealing with their very powerful lobbies in Washington, who seem to have gotten a foothold with the politicians. So, it's all wrapped up into, the political system, the pay-for-play culture, the lobbyists. there's a lot of different elements that need to be looked at, and so when you have a problem like this, it's not just a problem on its own, it's a part of a complex network, and it's going to need a complex solution, so we'll see. Now, there's been a couple of, I think, very interesting international stories, and one of them is about a British Member of Parliament called Jeremy Corbyn, C-O-R-B-Y-N. He's called the British Bernie Sanders, and he's around about 70 years old. He's been in politics for about 40 years, and he belongs to the Labour Party, which is the left-wing party in England. The other main party is the Conservatives, which are the right-wing party. And then you have a third party, the Liberals, that are somewhere in between. But Corbyn has always been a very vocal and very radical left-wing political leader. Back in the 1970s, he was and 80s, he vehemently argued against Margaret Thatcher's policies of privatising the railways, privatising nationalised industries. He's always been supportive of left-wing causes, and he was against the privatisation of the schools. Anyway, the last couple of years he's been rising in prominence within the Labour Party. The Labour Party had a leader called Ed Miliband, who got thoroughly defeated in the last election by David Cameron. It was an embarrassment to the Labour Party. So at the moment, the Labour Party is looking like a complete lame duck, as if it should just pack its bags and give up politics. But Corbyn has come to the rescue and has reinvigorated the party with his very confrontational rhetoric, essentially saying that there needs to be a shift back from the right-wing capitalistic views that seem to occupy Britain at the moment to a more central and left-of-central position. Now, a lot of political commentators feel that what he's doing is he's setting the party up for the next Labour leader, because some of his views are particularly radical and they are very left of centre, and to suddenly take the British populace from a right of centre position to a radical left of centre is unrealistic. But what he's doing is he's shifting the pendulum in preparation for the next Labour leader, who hopefully will be the Prime Minister in 2020. But similarities have been made between him and Bernie Sanders in the States, and both of them know each other, and the common ground that they share is their view with regards to large corporations. And very simply, if one can categorize them in this way, they're both men of the people. So they stand for what's referred to as the working class. And when you say the working class, people always think of people who are doing manual labour, but that's not the case anymore. The working class actually includes people who are sitting at computers all day, people who are sitting in offices all day. These are the working class. So that demographic has shifted, and these are the demographics that Sanders and Corbyn represent against the corporate interests, against the big entities that are coming in and trying to push down the minimum wage, are trying to reduce the benefits in America that workers obtain from their employment. And they're trying to redress this imbalance. And one of Bernie Sanders' positions has been that we want to re-establish the middle class, which is what Corbyn has been saying, because in America, as in Britain, but to a lesser extent, there has become what has developed is a very stark divide between the haves and the have-nots. 95% of wealth in America is occupied by 1% of the people, and 5% occupies the balance. Now that's a huge disparity, and there's been talk about the shrinking middle class. So you've now got this very small number of people that have most of the wealth, and you have a lot of people that really live from paycheck to paycheck. Now this situation, although people don't quite have the same sense of urgency that I think is consistent with that, they should, because when we look today at Greece and we look at what's happened to Greece, within the last 10 years, Greece has gone from a very wealthy European country that was on the rise, that the economy was growing, there was huge investment coming in. It is now in a state of complete chaos. I mean, there are revolutions going on the street. The people are trying to get out of the country. They're being blocked at the Albanian borders, at the Macedonian borders. the country is in a complete state of chaos. And it's happened in the space of 10 years, that it's gone from being an extremely wealthy European state to now to really being worse than a lot of third world countries. And the same thing that has happened in Greece could easily happen here in America. You know, the moment people have a car, a house, some don't even have that actually, but there's enough people that have enough in terms of material possessions to have not gotten to that point of revolution. But it's not far away. I mean, a couple of weeks, a couple of paychecks where there's no money and where cars and houses and foods become unobtainable leads to the type of thing that's happening in Greece. And so I think that that should be used as a warning to America that this issue with the middle class and what's happened here it's a very dangerous situation. It's a real tinderbox that's about to explode. And it's always the same scenario that happens before any type of revolution occurs. I mean, for example, you look at what happened with the French Revolution. It was exactly that. It was the aristocracy and it was the poor who eventually had enough and took matters into their own hands. So without, hopefully America having to go down that path, a political solution comes into the fore, and a political party is elected and starts to enact legislation that's going to bolster the middle class. Some people say that's not going to happen. It's unlikely to happen because they feel that America has become too financially polarized, that the people with the money will simply take the money elsewhere and will use that money to invest in other markets and not back in America. And in a way, that's what's referred to as the free market. And there's very little that governments can do to actually force people to keep their money here and invest it here. What the American government has to do is they have to make America an attractive place for American companies to want to invest and to bring their money in. And that's tied into making sure that the tax code is uniformly applied, relies to making sure that labour is appropriately provided and is affordable and competitive. Because even though Bernie Sanders wants to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the downside of that is that it's going to make American companies uncompetitive with global companies. When you've got companies in India, in China, in Africa, who are paying their employees $1 a day, and you've got employees in America being paid $150 a day, it makes it very hard for American companies to compete on the global market. And that's an issue that a global politician will have a keen eye on. Now, the other international story that I think is of great interest is the story of 3 journalists who were writing for Al Jazeera, which is one of the big media outlets. They're based out of Qatar in the United Arab Emirates. And these 3 journalists were covering the riots and the civil war that was going on in Egypt over the last couple of years, and the various leaders that had been deposed and the various coups that were going on. Now, there were 3 journalists, so one of them was an Australian, Peter Burst, and 2 of them were originally Egyptian. One had Canadian citizenship and the other was Egyptian. Now, the Australian journalist was deported from the country approximately a year ago, and the 2 Egyptians were held there and underwent a criminal trial which concluded yesterday. And the Australian journalist was tried in absentee, and he was also sentenced to 3 years in jail. And their crime was that they had been accused of breaking certain laws with regards to getting permits to report, and secondly, that they had been spreading false information about the government and about the proceedings. Now, whenever journalists or media people around the world are imprisoned, there's a huge outcry from the media community saying that they're curtailing free press, that they are violating the rights of the journalists. But there's always 2 sides to every story, and the argument has been made by some people that really what's happened in the West with America, Europe, other parts of Western societies is that the media have in fact become too unregulated. And so you've got a media, for example, in Britain, that just writes whatever it wants. It doesn't matter. They call it freedom of expression and the freedom of the press. And there's a downside to that as well. If you have a media organisation, and in some instances controlled by certain corporate parties, that feels that it can write whatever it wants, that in many ways is as abhorrent as the incident that happened in Egypt. There's no difference in terms of the outcome to that. And so some people have said that in fact there should be more safeguards, there should be more guidelines, more regulations put on the press in the UK and in the US. The argument against that is now that we have the internet and the digital age has essentially taken over, every individual has become his or her own journalist, and to use the expression, the cat is out the bag, that really is the case. The cat is out of the bag, and people can now essentially write and draft their own version of news stories and events, and not have anything happen. So the one thing I do think, however, is a little bit hypocritical is the fact that the Western media start jumping up and down and making a big fuss when journalists are imprisoned in other countries. And part of me can't help feeling that these countries that imprison these journalists do so not because it gives them any great pleasure, but because these journalists, under their law, have broken the law. And so they are therefore imprisoned. And these journalists that are allowed into these countries are allowed in under the terms, regulations and the laws of that country. If they break those laws, as in any country, then it's right that they should be arrested and tried, just as they would if they were in a Western country and somebody broke a law there. So I think it's, sometimes it's a case of double standards and hypocrisy, but I think each country has its own system, and the people going into that country, including journalists, must abide by those regulations. Now, just to say that I'm not a great supporter or fan of imprisonment or jail. Particularly for non-violent offenders, I don't agree with it. So I do feel that the sentence was and is rather harsh, but I think it makes a point that journalists cannot expect to travel the globe and write indiscriminately about issues in countries where they know there are certain rules and regulations. So I don't have a solution for the last problem. I think that journalism is something that has changed over the last 5 years. It's become a much more democratic process. The internet has done that. There's every individual that has a computer or laptop can be his or her own journalist, and the professional journalists, I think, are finding themselves on the wane, and that's why I think more and more of them are looking to put themselves into more challenging circumstances to try and get the story that nobody else can get, and as a consequence, incidents as it happened in Egypt do occur more frequently. So I'd like to thank you all again for watching this episode of 9, and good night.